DevOps iterations.
And here we are, a new iteration where we are going to do a deep dive on the Pulp, this wonderful open source project. And we are doing that with Dennis Kliban, who is one of the authors. Are you actively working on Pulp?
Yeah, I've been working on Pulp for about 10 years now.
Okay, so you definitely know the stuff here. So, stage is all yours. Let us know what is Pulp and how it works.
Yeah, so Pulp is an open source project that makes it easy for developers to fetch, upload, organize, and distribute software packages on-prem or in the cloud. And I'm reading that right off of our homepage here. What it essentially does, it allows organizations to take repositories that are available on the internet and create local mirrors within their organizations. It also allows those same organizations to distribute their own software. So if they have clients that are consuming their software, they can use Pulp to upload their packages into Pulp and then make them available to their customers or to their users. We support multiple content types, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But first, I would like to show how to just even start it up. So on our homepage, you can go to the installation quick start, and you will learn that there are multiple ways of deploying Pulp. Right now, we've noticed there is an increased interest in running it on Kubernetes or OpenShift. We've developed an operator that helps users do that. The operator manages all the different services, which we will go over in a little bit. You can also deploy it using a single container, which has multiple processes inside of it. And it has the database inside that container. And this is what we're actually going to do today to do the simplest deployment. And then the last way to deploy it is using Docker or Podman Compose, which will take the containers and will deploy multiple containers, one for every service that you need. And actually, there is a fourth way to do it.
The good way, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so the other, we used to have an installer. It was Ansible based.
Okay.
It was supported multiple operating systems. It worked on Debian. It worked on Red Hat based operating systems, but it was a lot for us to keep up with. The matrix that we had to test was a lot, and that's when we moved to just using containers. However, that installer would support installing using RPM packages. And Pulp is actually used by the Foreman project, which lets you do systems management. And Pulp provides the content management aspect of it in Foreman. And Foreman actually packages Pulp as RPMs. And there is a Puppet module. It's the Pulp Core Puppet module that lets you install Pulp using those RPMs. And so we don't list that on our website right now, but after talking to people at these past conferences this winter, it seems to me like we really should advertise it on here also. That is another way to install it. It's this Pulp Core Puppet module that's available on Puppet Forge. It's very well documented, and it will allow you to install from RPM packages that are available from the Foreman project. Anyway, let's get started with the single container. Alessandro, do you have any questions so far?
No, it's wonderful so far. I'm just surprised that you don't even show the the standard package-based way to install it on the web page. But I guess it's a sign of the times, so it's fine.
Yeah.
I guess I'm
All
too
right.
old for getting used to this. Go ahead.
All right. So we're first going to make some directories, which we're going to basically use as volumes in our container. And then I'm going to create a settings file. Right now, the latest release that we have, well, the latest release showing here is 3.71. However, not all the plugins we have are compatible with that yet. That compatibility will happen here in the next few days. So the image that we're going to use is actually 3.69. Anyway, in 3.69, you have to specify this setting. In 3.70, we made this setting optional. And this setting will be used by the REST API to tell clients and users where content can be consumed. Okay. But it's nothing to really worry about right now. So on my system, I have SC Linux enabled. So I'm going to use this top command to start the container. For systems that don't have SC Linux, there's a command below here that can be used. And the main difference is that you don't pass in this :Z whenever you specify these volumes. We have a volume for the settings file. We have a volume for storage. This is where the binary data is actually going to be stored. Pulp actually supports S3 storage. If you want to use object storage instead, and this is what a lot of users use, you then don't have to have this storage. You just in your settings file, you provide settings for the S3 bucket that you want to use. All right, so let me copy this command.
So of all these directories, I guess the Pulp storage is the one which is supposed to be large enough for your repositories.
Exactly, for all the, yeah. And so Pulp deduplicates packages. So if you have a package that's present in multiple repositories, it's actually stored once on disk.
Nice.
So let me look at the logs for this. All right. So right now, the container is starting up. All the services inside of it are starting up. It's going to have to run some migrations. It's going to take a little bit of time. And while that's happening, I want to go over the architecture of the application.
Okay. Can you make it a small bit larger?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this architecture is available on our website. We recently, about 6 months ago, remade our website. It used to be a bunch of different sites because we were using Sphinx sites that we built from each of our projects. We had a new team member join who really thought that we could use a better site. We all agreed with him, and he took on this project and he unified all of our docs, which is nice because now you have this search here that you can search for everything. So anyway, so if you want to look at this architecture, you just go in here, you search for architecture, and this page will come up. So anyway, there are three main components to Pulp. There's the REST API, and this is what our CLI client uses to interact with Pulp, and you can use the REST API directly also. Then there's the content app, and this is the component that's used to serve packages. So if you have a DNF or Yum client that needs to install a package, it's going to talk to the Pulp core content process. And then we have Pulp core workers, and you can have many of those. Obviously, you can have many Pulp core contents and Pulp core APIs, but for Pulp core workers, you will want to kind of experiment and see how what your workload requires. The workers perform asynchronous tasks. These tasks include syncing packages from a remote source, generating metadata for repositories, moving packages from repository to repository, anything that requires locking a resource like a repository, because you don't want operations on a repository happening simultaneously. We want to make sure that they happen in the order that Pulp received them. So the tasking system that we have is very important to making sure that everything stays in working order and in expected order. The other things that will notice here is that there's an Nginx or Apache or some kind of reverse proxy in front of Pulp that will expose the content app and the API at the same host name on the same port. And that reverse proxy just sends the request to the appropriate process or pod if you are in Kubernetes. We rely on Postgres. When we were rewriting Pulp from Pulp 2 to Pulp 3, we initially had a goal of having being database agnostic. We're actually testing with both MySQL and Postgres, but then as Pulp 3 matured and we needed to use more and more features that were specific to a database, we had to just standardize on Postgres only.
Right.
And if you're deploying this, on Amazon, you can use RDS service that they provide, and that works really well. We also use Redis, and Redis helps us cache requests for content. Whenever Pulp manages content, it stores all that information about like a package belonging to a particular repository inside of Postgres. Whenever a client requests a package from this Pulp core content process, there's a bunch of database queries that have to be made. And the very first time that request comes in, it's kind of slow. However, the result of those queries is stored in Redis, and any subsequent requests are handled like hundreds of times faster, which is amazing. And so whenever you need to service a bunch of clients, it doesn't really matter that, that first one is going to get slow requests. The rest of them are going to get really fast responses. And then as you can see here on the bottom of the diagram, we have storage. You can use a shared file system like NFS or whatever else you want to bring, but you can also use object storage. And we use Django storages to do that. So we support S3, Google Files storage, whatever it's called. We don't test it in RCI, so we don't claim that we support it, but it should work.
Where do you configure these and the other stuff mostly?
Yeah, this is configured in, let's see, learn in reference here, settings. We have a settings file, and the settings are under storage settings, storages. We link people to the Django storages documentation for how to properly configure each storage type. And the settings can be provided either in that settings file that we created before. Let's see. We created this settings file earlier, and we set this content origin to Fedora 8080, which is not correct actually, but that's okay. But in this settings file, you can provide other settings, or you can
go here, right?
Or you can use environment variables. We use a project called Dynaconf to manage all of our settings, and it lets you provide all these settings as environment variables also. And that's what I actually recommend that folks use. So let's see. I think that's it for
just out of curiosity. Why do you recommend using environment variables over the settings YAML? Any particular reason?
I like it because, well, right now I'm operating Pulp actually, and that's running on OpenShift, and it's much easier for me to modify the environment variables that I pass into each pod during the deployment than it is to go into Vault and modify the settings file in the Vault. And it's just, so maybe it's just a personal situation that I'm in right now, but for me, it's easier to modify environment variables. And that's not the case for everybody. All right.
Anyway, so I think having the choice is a good thing, I guess. So.
Yeah, it's definitely good. And the environment variables will override the settings file. All right, so let's take a look at what we have now. So I deployed, let's see, we have Pulp started. Whenever it starts, the first thing it does is submits analytics to analytics.pulpproject.org. This feature is enabled by default. If you want to disable it, you can disable it in the settings. It does not report any sort of identifiable information. It reports the versions of plugins that you're running and some statistics about your use of the RBAC system. And then that data actually goes to analytics.pulpproject.org. We are just, and this is loading right now. And really, it's just for us to kind of see what people are using. Like, really, at one point, we were very interested in Postgres versions because, like, we're in, like, there's a lot of different Postgres versions people are using. So anyway, let's go back to...
Can you, out of curiosity, go back to the graph where you have the different versions to see the Pulp versions, to see which ones are...
Yeah, definitely. So let's go to the core plugin versions. Core is our, like, the main package of Pulp. And so people see there's 3.69 is our latest release where all the plugins are compatible with it. And there's only 73 of them out there. But it's been out now for probably a couple of months, actually. We released 3.70 during config management camp. While we were there, my coworker and I pushed the button. Luckily, our release process is very automated, and we can just do that from a conference.
The reason I don't see any 2.something versions is because you don't collect the statistics for them, or because nobody's using it anymore?
Exactly. We introduced these statistics in 3.21.
Okay.
Yeah, so Pulp 2 is definitely still used out there. I don't recommend anybody using it. It's definitely been end of life a long time ago, but people have learned that if you just restart the processes every few days, it works. but there are like memory leak. There's all sorts of problems with Pulp too. But for some organizations, it just works for them, and they continue using it.
And is it hard to upgrade from 2 to 3 in case?
We created a plugin called the Pulp 2 to 3 migration plugin, and it helped users migrate. However, because Pulp 2 was using MongoDB as its database for Pulp 2, the data quality is not so good because Mongo just lets you write whatever document you want. And what we discovered as we were migrating all these users and Red Hat customers, really, like the main motivation for creating the migration plugin was so that paying customers for Red Hat could migrate from Pulp 2 to Pulp 3, because it's part of a product called Satellite, which is what the Foreman is. Foreman is sold by Red Hat as Satellite. And so we obviously created this for our community, and our community used the plugin, and they found a lot of edge cases for us. But even after that, whenever Red Hat customers were using it, it was a really painful process. And so my recommendation is deploy Pulp 3 and sync all your content that you have in Pulp 2 into it.
Again, repositories, so it's something quite, defined in some way. I guess it's just a matter. And let's say minor migrations, upgrades. So, for example, now you start the pod, the container with the latest version. When there will be a new version, it will be enough to start a new container, or there are some.
You can just start the new container, and the container will handle all the upgrades. It's going to run the database migrations for you, and that's pretty much the main thing that happens for the upgrade. We release very frequently. The reason we had a little bit of a delay here between 369 and 370 is because we designated the 3.70 release as a backwards incompatible release for our plugins, meaning that plugin writers will have to make some sort of changes to stay compatible. These changes are not visible to our users. Our REST API, we make a promise to our users that our REST API continues to be backwards compatible. But for the plugin writers, we do designate some of these releases where we will introduce breaking changes for them. Or they're not necessarily breaking, but they're additional steps that plugins need to take in order to take advantage of whatever latest feature is being added in core. And so because 3.70 was that release, first of all, we were working to finish those breaking changes. And we also wanted to get to a point where the plugins were pretty close to being ready. And so 3.70 got released on like February 1st, I want to say, or something like that. It was one of the days at Config Management Camp. And then I think most of the plugins have already released their compatibility release. Okay. But we tried. So
about upgrades, can you jump between minor versions, or you have to follow?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can go a lot. Yep. And the Django's migrations system handles all that for us beautifully. Okay. It's really nice to be able to take advantage of all these frameworks and libraries that we use that do all the heavy lifting for us, and we just focus on content management.
Right.
All right. So we saw the analytics site. We see that this task right here completed. This task was to send the analytics data. All right. So let me show you how you can check that Pulp is running. You can go to the status API in the browser, and it will show you this page. It shows you that, oh, actually, I'm showing here a very old version because I didn't do a Podman pull. And this is a very old version. This is 3.39.1. But for the demonstration purposes, this will be fine.
Okay.
In this container, we have the Ansible plugin. We have a CertGuard plugin. CertGuard lets you create content guards, which are certificate-based. And content guards let you protect your repositories so that they're not just any client can consume the repo. You can do this with basic auth, or you can do it with certificates so that a client has to present a client certificate and client key. And this is what the CertGuard plugin helps you do. We have the container plugin in here also. The container plugin provides a container registry. So you can Podman or Docker push and pull images from Pulp. We have a Debian plugin for Debian package support. We have the file plugin, which lets you upload just arbitrary files. And people out there use the file plugin for random stuff.
I guess. It's fine.
But no, that's what it's for. You know, if you have
Exactly.
files to distribute to your computers, this is what you can use. We have the gem plugin for Ruby gems. We have the Maven plugin for Maven packages for Java stuff. OSTree is for OSTree images. Python plugin for Python wheels, and the RPM plugin for RPM packages.
So these are the core plugins, which are always shipped.
They're always shipped with the single container. However, if you deploy this with the Pulp Core Puppet module, you will have to select which of these packages you want to install and which of these plugins will be there for you to use. The status page also shows you the online workers. We have 2 workers, and they're not running any tasks right now. It says current task null. There's another worker. Then there's an API app, and then there's the content apps. It shows you that you have a database connection. I don't have Redis enabled right now, but that's all right. And we don't have domains enabled. Let me tell you a little bit about domains. Domains allow us to isolate our users. And so earlier I mentioned that Pulp deduplicates data. So any package that's stored in multiple repositories is actually stored only once on disk. But in some situations, you want to have multiple tenants that don't want their binary data shared. And in that case, you can enable domains and have a domain for each of your tenants. And then in that case, the binary data is shared within the domain, but not across domains. And each domain can have a different storage type associated with it. You can have S3 with one of them and file system with another, or different S3 buckets for each domain. And this is how I operate the service that I'm operating at Red Hat right now. I have many, many domains. I have hundreds of domains. And the domains all have different S3 buckets backing them.
Okay.
All right. So let's go over the most basic workflow of creating a mirror of a repository. And well, actually, let me show you this page first. This is the content app. This is where you can go browse your repositories. Right now, we don't have any content here. We just started this, so it's empty. But let's go to this site called fixtures.pulpproject.org. We have a bunch of repositories here that we use for testing, basically. I'm going to copy this URL. This is going to be the repository that we're going to make a copy of. To do this, we first need to actually install the Pulp CLI client. And to do that, I'm going to create a virtual environment called Pulp CLI. We're going to activate it. Then we're going to install Pulp CLI. Pulp CLI provides you a command called Pulp. And you can then create a config, create. And this created this file for me, but really I want to modify it. You can, the create command takes a bunch of parameters that you can pass in if you want to create a config with specific settings, but we're just going to modify it with the Vim. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to change this to HTTP, and right now I have it running on port 8080. And then I believe we need to put in username and password, I believe. Oh, 1 second. Well, you know what? Let's go to the docs. We have documentation for this. Configuration. Sir, okay. It did not say it there, but oops. The default password, oh, actually, we need to, because I don't think there is a password set right now, is what I just realized. Connection reset by P. 1 second. Help, localhost 8080. HTTP localhost.
Verify SSL true is needed if you use HTTP.
That setting does not apply if
it's used. Okay.
Oh, actually, let me do this.
Maybe the Docker is exposing the port. Yeah, it's exposing. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's working here.
The demo effect, Dennis.
Yeah.
Let's see.
It looks the same, right?
Yeah.
How is this? Let me think. Well, why is it not working here? 1 sec. Well, let me try something else. Okay, well, so I have another instance running. It's my dev box, and we're going to use that. Let me just... Whoa.
No, I guess
Whoa, what happened there? My Vim skills are not so good, I guess. Oh yeah, I got to modify. Cool. We are going to be looking at a different instance of Pulp, but that's okay. Let me go open up the content app for it. I believe. Where is it? Okay. All right. I have the domains enabled actually in my developer environment where I'm showing this now. And the default, we're going to be looking at the default domain. And right now it doesn't have anything in it. And so what first we're going to do is we're going to create a remote Pulp RPM remote create. Let's see. I wanted to show the help text for it really first. The first thing is you create a remote. A remote defines a remote repository that you can get packages from. You have to give it a name. You got to give it a URL. You can give it all these other settings. One of them, actually, that's an important one, is download concurrency. What sometimes users experience is that the server that they're trying to access does not like a bunch of concurrent downloads going on. And so they have to tune that. You can turn off TLS validation if that's necessary for you. But anyway, so let's create this remote name. I'm going to call it Zoo. The URL is going to be this URL from right here. And let's see. There's also this policy. And so we support 3 policies for these remotes. And this is the download policy. An immediate policy means that whenever you sync the repository, Pulp downloads the metadata and all the binary data and saves all the binary data. On demand, we'll have Pulp download the metadata, but not the actual binaries. Whenever a client requests the binary from Pulp, the Pulp core content app is going to fetch that binary data from the remote source, and then it's going to stream it to the client. And only after that, it's going to save it in Pulp. And any subsequent requests to Pulp are going to come from Pulp. And then there's the third one called streamed. And streamed policy will basically work like on demand, except the package will never be saved in Pulp. Every time it's going to be streamed from the remote source. All right, so let's do policy on demand. And I believe it's actually the default policies now on demand.
Which makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Well, because most of the time you will only want a part of the repository anyway, and so whatever your clients are interested in, that's what you want to store.
Right. I mean, I guess unless you are in an air-gapped place where you may want to have everything locally, otherwise it makes sense.
Yeah, and so for the air-gapped use case, Pulp supports exports, and we're not going to demonstrate that today, but you can export your Pulp, and then you can take it on disk, this export, to your air-gapped environment, and then you can import it into that air-gapped environment.
Nice.
And you can do this in these like incremental exports. So you're not exporting everything, where you can just export the latest from a certain time.
Okay, so you may have a sort of 2 instances of Pulp, one public-facing, one internal, which synchronize regularly. That's nice.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so we created a remote, and now we're going to create a repository. A repository is where the packages will be stored once they're in Pulp. So Pulp RPM repository create, and we'll look at the help text for this. You can give a repository this setting called retain package versions. This is going to control how many, because every time you sync, you can have the packages be additive, where it will add new packages that are found into the repository, but it will not remove the packages that are missing. Like if a repository updated the version of a package and then removed the previous version, your Pulp will continue collecting them. And this setting right here will let you say, only keep this many older versions of a package. The other thing that I wanted to mention is this auto publish setting. And in Pulp, the act of creating a publication for a repository is the generation of metadata. So you can be adding packages to a repo, but until you make a publication of it, the packages will not be really consumable by a client, because the metadata that's like repo data directory for RPM, it won't be there. And yeah, so let's create. Oh yeah, the other thing is that you can remote. You can assign a remote to it, so that whenever you sync a repository, you don't have to specify from which remote repo you're syncing from. It will just always have it assigned to it. And so we're gonna do that. Name. I like to name my remotes and my repositories the same name if they go together. But Pulp is a toolbox, and Pulp lets you have many different workflows, and I'm just going to show you the one that I like. Name zoo, remote zoo also, because that's what we named our remote. And I'm also going to tell it to do auto publish, so you don't have to create a publication as a separate step. And so this created a repository. However, even though I created this repository is still not going to show up here on this page. It's here because the things that show up in the content app are the ones that have a distribution created for them. A distribution is an object in Pulp that lets you reserve a URL in the content app that's going to make a repository available. And so let's make a distribution. And all of these objects are content typed. So if you have noticed probably that each time I'm creating something, I put in RPM as the first part of the command. So pulp RPM distribution, create. We're going to name it also zoo, and we're going to give it a repository. Repository zoo. Oops.
So you always need a remote and a repository to create a distribution. So first the remote and then
well, this is for this the use case where we are mirroring a repository. Right. The other thing that I want to show you is uploading packages. And so this requires a base path, and we'll give it a base path of zoo or my zoo. How about that? This is the first operation that we ran that created a task for us. And the reason that we have to create distributions using the tasking system is because of this base path that we give. We got to make sure that paths don't collide with each other. And so if two distributions are being created at the same time, we can't just let the database say that they don't match, because like you can have nested paths inside of each other, and a database can't really handle that. So anyway, now that we've created that, we can see that my zoo showed up here, because that's the base path I picked for it. But right now, when we go to browse it, it gives me a 404. And that's because we don't have any content in the repository. So let's go sync the repository. Pulp RPM repository sync. And then we'll give the name of the repository that we want to sync. And we're going to say sync the repository zoo. It started a task, and there are actually 2 tasks that ran. There was also a publication creation task, but because we said auto publish true, it created it for us. And so now we have all these packages available in Pulp. And now a client can use this repository. Yeah. So then.
So, I mean, one of the known use cases when you use Pulp to have different versions of packages for production servers, testing servers, and so on. So I guess you handle this with different distributions.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And so what you can do, let me show you. So what I can show you now is Pulp RPM repository version show name zoo. Okay, we have this repository, and here we have a latest version href. And we can see that the latest version is version 1. Every time that we modify the repository, we create a different repository version. And so I have this package here called complex package. Let's upload this package to this repository now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we can have 2 different distributions pointing to 2 different versions of the same repository. Pulp RPM. Let's see. I think. No, let's see. Pulp RPM. I gotta look at the docs. One sec. Okay. Pulp content upload. Pulp RPM. All right. So we uploaded this complex package to repository zoo. And what it did was it says created new version 2. It published the repository, and it returned us the repository here. And now you can see that the latest version is version 2. And when we go back to here, in packages and under C, we added this complex package. As you can see, the timestamp on all the other ones is 1818, but here it's 1822. We uploaded this one just now. So what we can now do, though, is we can create another distribution that's going to serve us the older version. So let's do that. Pulp RPM distribution create name old zoo or production zoo. And then repository version, I believe, is what you can give it.
Okay, you copy the type.
Ref, but I'm going to make it version 1, and base
in repository version.
Yeah, and I see a distribution can take a repository, and if it takes a repository, it always serves the latest version of that repository, or you can give it a specific repository version that you want. Oh, and I misspelled version, repository version. And zoo prod.
Okay.
Oh, you know what? It probably takes a publication is what it is. Let's see. Pulp, RPM, publication, list. Okay. What a distribution takes, it can take either a repository in this case or a publication. And so we're going to take this first publication that we had. And we're going to, and some plugins that don't have publications would take a repository version. But in this case, we take a publication because the publication is what contains the packages plus the metadata.
Okay.
All right. So now we've created this other publication. Other distribution, and I'm going to open it in a new tab here. We're going to go to packages, and we're going to go to see. Oh, I gave it the wrong publication because.
Yeah, the latest.
Yeah. So let's fix that. Let's see. Pulp created 1818. 1822. Yeah, okay, we need this one. This is the old one. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do Pulp RPM distribution update name. I think it was production zoo, what I called it. And then do publication. We updated it. This is zoo prod, yeah. And now it's not there anymore.
Okay. Okay, fine. I guess so. The reason why, as soon as you uploaded the new packages, you immediately found it because you enabled the auto publication feature.
Exactly.
Right? And that's why the initial repo was the most updated, and then you created a, let's say, older one which you can manually handle. Okay, right. What is the recommended workflow? This auto publication is common, or maybe it's better to just do the right?
The auto publication is pretty common. However, for situations where you're uploading packages and not just mirroring repositories, I don't recommend doing auto publish because you typically want to upload many packages out, and you don't want to generate the metadata after each upload. You want to generate the metadata after you've uploaded all the packages that you wanted to upload at that time. And in that case, you would create a publication manually, and I can show the command for doing that. Pulp RPM publication create repository zoo, and that creates a publication for you.
Okay.
And there are other options, like you can tell it from which repository version you want it to be from. Yeah, because it takes repository and version.
So you mentioned at the beginning you have several plugins. What are they used for? For new kind of repositories, or what are the plugins doing?
Yeah, so we support multiple content types. So for each content type, we have a plugin. We have Ansible, which is for managing Ansible collections and roles. We have the container one to run a container registry. Debian. So our most popular ones are RPM and Debian. Like most people, that's what they're using it for. But Ansible is also used. Like Red Hat has a product that uses Pulp for managing Ansible content. It's the Ansible automation platform. And file plugin actually comes with Pulp Core now. It used to be a separate package, but we now actually have combined it into Pulp Core. And then there's the Python plugin that lets you mirror PyPI, but I don't recommend doing that. I recommend just using it as a pull-through cache, where that's the other option where you can just use Pulp as a pull-through cache. So without syncing stuff or anything, as clients request stuff from you, Pulp downloads it, streams it to the client, and then saves it so that the next time it comes from Pulp.
Let's say, let me ask you a stupid question. How do you compare it to Artifactory or a tool like that? I mean,
well, Artifactory is our number one competitor, and the biggest difference is that they provide a UI. I don't have a UI to show you, but we recently did add a UI actually. The UI right now is pretty basic. It mostly lets you visualize the tasking system, and it also lets you visualize Ansible content, because the UI was actually written for the Ansible automation platform, and we got to inherit it from that. So right now it's a very limited UI, and so that's the biggest difference, is that we don't have a UI. And otherwise, I think we're pretty similar. We're fully open source. That's the biggest difference. The biggest difference is that we're fully open source, because they're open core.
Right.
They provide you a little bit of functionality for free, but then you got to pay them money for the rest of it.
Indeed. Well, I guess there is a lot of things to talk about, and I guess the more you deep inside and more you get things to know, but it's, I guess, reached is our threshold, which I guess is enough to have a good introduction about the tool. Dennis, is very interesting. It's you gave the basic concepts, which I guess is the things that we need to begin with, no, the basic ideas. And do you have something maybe you want to add to underline or whatever?
I just want to thank you for the opportunity to come speak about Pulp. I've been working on it for many years, and I always like an opportunity to talk about it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your presentation here. it's very useful, especially, I mean, for me personally, but I guess also for whoever is interested in a tool like this.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
So see you at the next conference, I guess.
I hope so. I really hope so.
Wonderful, and all the best for the future, yours and of Pulp.
Thank you. You too. You too.
Abnormal DevOps iterations.